way-seeking mind, basically.
Like a jump cut.
Yeah.
There's no harmony.
All right, we're broadcasting.
Okay, I'll circle back on that here.
Okay, let me introduce our speaker today, Doshin.
We got a lot.
We got a lot of people that
aren't in here yet, so I was just getting it started.
Do you want me to go ahead and announce or wait?
I will wait till everybody gets in.
Okay. Give me my
We can edit later. It's not like we're going live.
I feel like the applicant came down too early for dinner and they sent him back to his room.
back to the room. So I was in Dallas for work this week and had a couple of minutes and or afternoon when I didn't have anything to do. I went into the guitar shop, vintage guitar shop, and I'm looking around and I see this guitar on the wall. And I turned to the guy and I said, "Is that what I think it is?" And he goes, "Yeah, it was a 1929 Marquis single 45.
Wow.
It's only 3 of those in existence.
What's that word?
Their asking price is $33,000.
Three?
33. Yeah.
32.
33.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, there's one here.
Oh.
Good.
Yeah, it's a.
What about the equivalent of age, huh?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was spending a lot of time in art to get this way.
Did you get to that?
Yeah.
Oh, man. I was thinking Picasso, he didn't make the money on his art. It's all the people who were left to start making art. And he made it up. So Martin is kind of like our American Stradivarius.
Oh, absolutely. Especially the guitars from that period. So.
Who's the other great one? Guarneri or something like that?
Joseph, what's the name of the guitar?
Unary, yeah.
Um,
Unary?
Is that- yeah.
let's call it reason and unreason.
Reason and unreason.
Yeah.
Okay. You're ready for a mind builder.
We're doing mystery tea today.
So let me know when I should start, Joseph. Thank you. Half cup I drink. A cup of matcha this morning. Go over the shade tree. Smells like mold. Had a great uncle. He used to tell just disgusting stories around the dinner table so the kids would lose their appetites and wouldn't eat much. Because it smells like mold when I won't drink that much.
There you go.
So are we ready?
Yeah, we waiting on me? Yeah, we're ready.
Okay.
We're live.
So what is today? Today is February
3rd.
3rd, 2019. And today's featured guest, speaker at the Atlanta Soda Zen Center is Doshin, Joe Johnson. Doshin, Do means way, Shin means mind, also means heart mind, not just intellectual mind, both in Chinese and Japanese. And so his name translates loosely to something like the way of the mind or the way seeking mind. This is a very classic phrase in Zen, and very appropriate for Doshin. So Doshin is a professor of philosophy, long-time expatriate in Japan, where he fully assimilated the language, became Gaijin Tabuto, right? Did you run into any resistance in Japan because you were so sophisticated in the language?
Yeah, they like gaijin to act like gaijin,
Yeah.
to be the resident gaijin.
The young man who Oliver Yorkston and I visited in 1989 was like that. He was a Vietnam expatriate in Japan, but he had assimilated the language so much and the culture so much. People would come up to him and talk like baby talk Japanese. And he would come back with a very erudite response. And he said it caused such resistance, almost resentment that he had to become like a comic to break the tension. So he would speak Japanese with an East Indian accent, funniest sound you ever heard, to get people to laugh. And so I hope your experience was more positive than that. So welcome, Joe Johnson, Doshin. Looking forward to your talk, and your talk is called
Let's call it reason and unreason.
Reason and Unreason.
Okay, you have
First of all, everyone today, I'd like you to place all the blame on Mike. Because he's the one who 2 weeks ago suggested this. I think it's either because somebody bailed on him, or maybe because the Super Bowl is today, and he thought he might be safe because all of you would be preparing for the Super Bowl. So,
That's not even remotely the reason why. The reason why.
or the other reason is because I give people a hard time sometimes. So
The reason is I don't know how many times I've been in here for Dharma talks, even Dharma talks that I gave, since they gave, or our guest gave, and Joe's responses and his questions were so good. All I could do was, I am really glad you're here. So I thought it would be a great idea to have Joe do a talk of his own.
His turn on the hot seat.
His turn on the hot seat.
it would be a good idea if he would, but you're not getting that today. So, anyways, let's see. First of all, it's a little bit awkward to be sitting here because this is where the teacher sits. What do you call it? Is this a Dharma platform?
The high seat is actually that one.
Oh,
That's the high seat. This is just the bowing mat.
Oh, okay.
Very humble.
All right. Well, in any case, oh, by the way, this isn't a paper, an academic. There's not a single quote in here, a single page number, but just some loose ideas which I wanted to work up more. But you're just getting it off the cuff. But so I wanted to look up some interesting stories. There are a lot of interesting stories about the teachers sitting in front, and sometimes they challenge the audience. Sometimes the audience will challenge them, and sometimes somebody will come up and challenge the teacher. Even forcibly remove the teacher, and then it's like king of the hill and stuff like that. And this might go on for a few days. It's really interesting, and sometimes the teacher will concede, sometimes not concede. They're shouting and beating and all kinds of things. But you're familiar with these kinds of stories, right? So I thought we'd just kind of sidestep that whole issue today. And I think that we'll reserve this for a real teacher. And I'm just going to kind of sit off to the side. And in fact, if any of you Buddhas would like to please come up here and sit, please, you don't need to hit me in the process. Just come up here and sit.
I didn't bring the stick in, so we don't have the stick.
Okay, we were looking for it the other day. But, if you want to, throw me out, then fine. Okay. Come on. Any taker uppers? So, and like I said, I wish I could have turned this into something else, but it's really simple. The point I'm going to just make about reason and unreason is so simple. It's nothing that anybody doesn't already know. But though it's very simple, I find that some of these things, some of these ideas I'm going to talk about, even though I might consciously disavow them, I find that actually they still infuse, I'd say, infect my life, all of my operation, and they lead to great confusion. I would say that they are ongoing delusions on some level, on subconscious and unconscious levels. And I think that they contribute greatly to, I can say personally, a lot of suffering. And I would be interested to hear how or if, I suppose that a lot of you, most of you, all of you might be a lot better on some of these things than me, but I'm curious as to how some of these ideas that we consciously disavow actually interfere with our lives. In my case, that's quite clear. But what are these? And on that, in that vein, I'm mostly going to be talking about delusion today. I think it's in the Genjo Koan, isn't it? Sensei, what are the you remember the lines again? I don't have any quotes. I meant to get.
Oh, you want me to do the quotes?
Yeah, you do the quotes. You know, the one about delusion and enlightenment, you know, the one who is clear about delusion. And
Yeah, he says, those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings.
Yes, and see, that's really insightful, but it's missing the third category. Like those that are greatly deluded about enlightenment, you know, thinking that they might understand it, they're deluded. But the ones who are quite clear about delusion, they're the ones who maybe are on the road to enlightenment. Now, what about the ones who are just deluded?
Well, he goes on to say further, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization, who are, and then it doesn't say others, he just says, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization, who are in delusion throughout delusion. So, I thought originally, that meant, and there are others, right, who are in delusion throughout delusion. No, he's talking about the same person, the same Buddha, the same being, is continues realizing beyond realization and is in delusion throughout delusion. I think that his point there is he's resolving that there is no enlightenment without delusion.
Mm-hmm.
We're in delusion throughout delusion, I think.
Okay, well, that starts to get pretty subtle. I'll just stick with the delusiveness, the delusion, without thinking that I'm even very clear about that.
That's like non-duality delusion.
But
Non-duality.
so, but let's see. So I would like to just trace. So I want to talk about reason and unreason. And there are these different paradigms. And the paradigm that I'm going to set up and kind of reject and criticize is the paradigm that puts, reason at the center of our being, ourselves as reasoning minds, intellects, disembodied, disembodiable, and maybe immutable and immortal, pure minds, intellects. And of course, the contrasting view would be the one in Buddhism and in Zen that doesn't see intellect as being the real essence of who or what we are, and also does not buy into these notions of immutability and immortality. Again, this is all really simple stuff, but I find that it actually obstructs my life in big ways. So um, um, just the names that I want to mention today. I want to talk about Socrates and Plato and Descartes, because you know they're the biggest names in setting up that whole paradigm of the disembodied intellect. And then on the other side, what I wanted to do, but I wasn't able to develop it much. I'd like to talk about Zhuangzi. Maybe I'll just say a couple of words. You know, the Chinese Taoist philosopher, and then it would be nice if I could have said something about Lin Zai, or you know, Lin Ji in Chinese, Dogen, Buddha, but we'll see how this goes. Mainly, I want to set up the delusion part of it. And again, this is stuff that you all know. You know, it's stuff that probably everybody learns in general ed. And taking a philosophy class or literature class, my daughter's reading about some of these this stuff in high school. Even in she's taking an AP history class, and they're reading some of this kind of stuff. But you all know the story of Socrates, the 4th century BC, Athens, and he ended up getting executed by his fellow citizens in 399 BC. And you know, he was the teacher of Plato. And these two really defined, in so many ways, the whole Western tradition, either by way of you know, affirmation or ascription to their views, or by way of reaction to their views. You know, their importance intellectually, but also historically. They shaped the culture. They determined so much of the culture. And so much of this also fed into Christianity later. You know, Christians don't realize how much of so-called Christian philosophy is actually Platonic philosophy. And so there is that influence, but it's not just a matter of determining. At the same time, there are just elements in Christian thought that have strong affinity with Platonic Greek ideas, and so the two come together also very well. But you know that the story of Socrates, there's a very famous, you know, most of the dialogues are written in very dramatic form, like little plays. But there's a sequence of 3 in particular, and this is what what you might first come into contact with, and it's some or all of these 3 would be part of, I would easily say, at least 90% of any intro philosophy class, maybe 95% at least. So, you know, there's a good chance that you all know these. But these are, they're sequenced around Socrates' death. There's one, which might be the most famous, usually entitled The Apology, but sometimes Socrates' Defense, which is the story of his trial, where he argues his case, but he ends up being found guilty and sentenced to death. And then there's another dialogue named the Crito, which is about a short period of time, maybe 2 weeks or so, that he was imprisoned before his execution. And and then there's a third dialogue, the Phaedo, which includes, it's on the topic of the immortality of the soul. And then it also has an account of the last day of Socrates' life, all the way up to his last words.
Who wrote these? Who wrote
So-
them?
No, they were all written by Plato.
Who was his student?
Yes. Socrates, like Buddha, like Confucius, like so many, like Jesus, never wrote anything, but deeply inspired others, in this case Plato. And Plato went on to write all of this up and then develop it further. But so to start with, what I'd like to just look at are the conceptions of self and of value, in like, what is a valuable life? What is a good life? How we should live. And the notions of the soul, and then the body, self in relation to the body. These are all things that we're concerned with in Buddhism and Zen, aren't we? Self, no self, embodiment in this situation, value, where to place our attention and what has value, and also time, how much time is there, and then the topic of death. What is death, and how do we live based on this whole understanding of self, body, value, and time. So just to recount a little bit, Socrates, there are a lot of historical elements, and we aren't going to go into all of them, hardly any of them, but in his own account of why he got into trouble with his fellow citizens, he attributes this to incurring animosity from going around in a pesty way. He's called a gadfly, a pesty way, challenging the recognized authorities of the day, whether they be great politicians or literary greats who you would think would have great insight and knowledge into things like life and death and love and friendship and courage. After all, they're writing the timeless classics that we still read today. So there must be wisdom in them. The people who wrote them must be wise. So he would go up and talk to them. And also the artists, the politicians, they created the first democracy that we still try to model today in certain ways. And then think of all the art forms. We still go to museums, don't we, to see the most beautiful objects, statues, and so on. Clearly, the people who made these things must have had some understanding of beauty, of life, of death, of justice. Otherwise, how could they have left these things to us? But the problem seems to have been that when he went to question these people, he found that they didn't really know what you would expect them to know. And so he ended up thinking that, they were working more by way of inspiration and intuition rather than any real grasp of it. But in the course of his cross-examination of these prominent citizens, a lot of them got very much embarrassed in public. After all, if you take a great general or a great politician, and in the marketplace, through cross-examination, it comes out that they don't really know. They talk about justice and all these fine words, but they really don't know what they're talking about. These are people with power and reputation. And they can take offense at this. And so he thinks that that is why he got into trouble. And he explains also that he didn't do any of this by way of malice. He didn't set out to embarrass anyone. In fact, he was kind of thrown into the situation where he felt compelled to do this by something that an oracle said. And most of you know this story too. The oracle at the Temple of Delphi, dedicated to Apollo, who was greatly respected by almost everyone for not being able to say anything wrong, had told one of Socrates' friends, when the friend asked who is the wisest person, the oracle said, Socrates is the wisest. You know this story. And the friend, Chaerephon, goes back to Socrates and says, the oracle said that you're the wisest person. And Socrates said, that can't be true. I mean, I know that I am not wise. I don't know what knowledge is. I don't know what beauty is. I don't know what love is. I don't know what courage is. I don't know what friendship is. I don't know what virtue is. I don't know. So it can't be me. But, even Socrates respected the oracle. So you just can't go back to the oracle and the oracle, you said a fucking dumb thing. You're wrong. Stick it back in the oracle's face. You can't do that. Even Socrates, wanted to show deference. So his polite way of showing that the oracle was wrong was, his hope was, to go out and find somebody who was truly wise. And then politely go back to the oracle and say, oracle, thank you. I'm flattered that you named me as the wisest person, but I know that I am not wise. In this case, respectfully, I would like to suggest to you that I have identified somebody who is truly wise, and here is the name of that person. And henceforth, would you please not mention my name, but this person who is truly wise? That was his hope. So he went out to challenge these prominent politicians, literary greats. I mean, he lived at the time of Sophocles and so on. He went out, and the greatest artists of the time. He went out hoping to find one of these people and take the name back to the oracle. But what ended up happening was that all of these people got embarrassed in public. And he says that that's what incurred the wrath. It's not really clear that anybody really wanted to kill Socrates. Maybe they just wanted to humiliate him. And maybe if he had just apologized or something, they would have if he had taken a light punishment, they would have let him off. Or if he had just promised to not bother prominent citizens in public, or if he had volunteered to go into exile, to also resolve that issue. he probably would not have been killed. But he was such a stickler about this whole thing, about the pursuit of truth, that he ended up saying some things at the end of the trial that just got him into greater trouble. And then they ended up sentencing him to death. Oh, by the way, the end of the story about the oracle. So Socrates' conclusion about what the oracle said is that the oracle wasn't wrong. The oracle was right that Socrates was the wisest of persons, but not for the reason, not in the way that most people would understand that. Not because he was truly wise. He was wise only in the limited sense that he knew he wasn't wise. So, and everybody else who thought that they were wise, they weren't wise either. But the difference was they wrongly thought that they were wise, whereas Socrates truly knew that he wasn't wise. That tiny difference made him the wisest of persons. Anyways.
And by the way, to me, that's where it's close to Zen.
Well, so we get back to delusion, don't we?
Zen masters know that.
Yeah. Let's see, I'm trying to kill time so that I don't have to say anything about Zen or Buddhism. But let's see, maybe. So, but the reason why I say this is because it's really what's implicit in the story that I just told you. Not what I just told you, but what's implicit in that story. And this comes out in the Credo and in the Phaedo. So for the sake of time, let me just kind of jump through those ideas. In the Credo, again, it's not clear that anybody really wanted to kill Socrates. He was given the opportunity to escape. He could have gone to another Greek city-state. You know, again, if he had put himself in exile. Everybody was on board. You know, the money for the bribes had been gathered. The guards were in agreement. And nobody was going to chase him down. But here again, you know, he sinks himself deeper into his hole. And part of that, and this is where we get to the reason, you know, self, reason, death, value. Part of the reason is because he did identify his self with his philosophizing reason self. And he thought that if he went to another place, if he went into exile, either it wouldn't be a place where he could practice philosophy, be his self, or if he went to a good place where maybe they did philosophy, they probably wouldn't respect him as an escapee from a just process and from prison. And he would have seemed like a hypocrite talking about justice when he himself was an escaped convict. So he did not think that, given his conception of self and value, that he could live a meaningful life in that under those conditions outside of Athens. Instead, he thought it would be better to die. And death, he saw as merely the separation of the soul from the body. In his case, you know, and by soul, we mean something very, well, this is reason, the intellect, the separation. And he thought that if he died, you know, rather than going meaninglessly to one of these other locations in exile, he thought that he would be able to dwell maybe with the past dead greats, the past, dead generals and and Homer, who also must have had great understanding of life. And Socrates would be able to carry on his conversations in these ways. And that's what he saw value in. So reason, a life of philosophy, seeking that kind of truth through conversation outside of the body, which he saw as an impediment because, it obstructs the pure functioning of the mind. We get hungry, our legs hurt, or whatever. Our perception is often misguides us, and so on. Passions of the body might interfere with the clear operation of the intellect, of reason. So he was actually happy to drop the interference of the body. So he does not escape from prison. And then the next dialogue is the Phaedo, which is about the soul. And there are 4 different proofs for the immortality of the soul. Not all of them are serious. Like all of Socrates' dialogues, he never gives you the truth. In fact, he's trying to get you to think. So Plato always weaves a lot of bullshit. And it's up to the reader. The reader must become philosophical and sort through these things. So not all 4 of these are good, but the most serious of the proofs has to do with the nature of the intellect, the nature of the mind. And the argument is that the mind is most like the objects of thought and not the objects of perception. Now, the objects of perception in the world, these are all changeable, temporary, they come and they go. But, the objects of thought, these are immutable, permanent, true, and everything good. And they are deathless. They are timeless. And the argument there, the question is, well, is the mind, is the soul, is it more like the changeable things of the world, or is it more like these immutable things that it thinks about? Every rectangle that we see in the world is temporary, mutable, impermanent. It's here for a time and then it goes. However, things like rectangularity, rectangularity that mathematicians think about, the objects of thought, this does not change on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. In fact, the geometrical properties of whatever triangularity is, those truths will be truths even after all human beings have disappeared from the planet, even after the solar system is gone. The truths of mathematics, again, we can get into all kinds of talk, but the truths of mathematics were true before humans appeared. They'll be true after. The idea here is that the mind that thinks about these things is more of that nature than of the nature of this piece of paper. And therefore, the soul is immortal. But here again, we're talking about the intellect. Now, the last moments of Socrates' death, in fact, are also they also reveal this kind of thinking. Let's see. He is sentenced to death by drinking hemlock, and I've read different things about this, but the way that it's depicted in the dialogue, he willingly drinks the hemlock. He's happy to die. His friends are all crying, but he's not disturbed. He drinks the hemlock, and the way it's described in the dialogue, in the Phaedo, it works by numbing from the extremities up, and with the idea that death will happen when the lungs and the heart are paralyzed. But he also uses this as a kind of occasion to argue that what he essentially is the mind and not the body. Because as his body starts to numb, okay, my foot's gone, my knee's gone, my leg's gone, but I'm still here. I'm talking to you. This is me. I'm fully here. My body's going. It's not me. So, again, this is that conception of self. I don't think I'm going to get to Zen today, but you all, I don't need to, because you all know what the antithesis is, right? You know what this is. And then, interestingly, his last words. Does anybody remember his last words? Yeah.
He wants them to remember that he owed somebody a chicken.
That's right. Why?
Say it again.
He wants to remind them that he owed someone a chicken.
That's right. Who was that and why?
I don't remember.
It was some god, Aeschylus or
Yeah,
something like
Aeschylus
that.
or something.
And Aeschylus was like the god of healing. So there's a lot of irony here. Socrates is dying, but he understands it as a healing. He's being healed from the disease of the body, going to a healthier state of pure intellect, of mind. This is a good thing, and we see where his value is. And yes, his last words, remember to give Aeschylus a cock as a sacrifice, sacrificial things for healing. Well, let's see. I was going to talk about the Republic, which is the most famous of Plato's dialogues, but I won't, except to just say, again, a lot of you would have read the allegory of the cave and the analogy of the divided line, sun, and so on. But here, Plato goes a lot farther than Socrates in painting this metaphysical world of what he calls forms, or these ideas, triangularity and everything else, beauty itself. Not beautiful things, not a beautiful cup, but beauty itself. And then he also combines that with his theory of justice, which is based on a class society. And it simplifies things, but we could say that the ideal type of person is the kind that belongs to his class of philosopher kings who go through a very rigorous and long educational process, including years of study in abstract thinking of mathematics, but also beauty, aesthetics, and so on. And there, if we want to talk about ultimate value, the ultimate value would be some kind of beatific vision of the good. Again, a completely abstract entity, not a good cup, not a good cookie, not anything like that, but just something purely intellectual. And only the rare individual is capable of going to that point. And those people, they're supposed to be the rulers of the good society. But peoples whose minds go that far, they have no natural inclination to really come back down into the cave and to do the dirty work of ruling society. I mean, they would rather be, with their minds in this kind of mystic communion with the good. So it takes some strategizing to pull them back down So again, here, we see the contrast entirely with Zen. With Zen, everything is about right here, right? And not being lost in some other world with ideas. But that's exactly where you start with the Socratic view about reason as the essence of the self, as a disembodiable soul. And you push that and it goes to exactly where, well, it can go to other places as well. But one place it can go is where Plato takes it there. And, that's a view. I keep saying the same thing, so I won't say it. But it just contrasts completely with kind of a Buddhistic understanding of self, of body, of value, of activities, meaningful activities. So an interesting contrast. I think that maybe the most interesting Chinese philosopher is Zhuangzi. I mean, you might know him by Chuang Tzu, together with Lao Tzu or Lao Tzu, the most famous of Chinese philosophers. But the book, the Zhuangzi, named after him, it's quite different from the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu. And but in it, it's interesting. And by the way, I'm not going to argue for this academically, but it's my personal view, and many people would say the same, that Zen is probably the product in China of Buddhism combined with some of this kind of Taoistic, in particular, Zhuangzian type of thinking. Because, first of all, Zhuangzi, again, I think most of you would know him. He's the one who told the story about, well, I had a dream of being a butterfly, but now I'm confused. How many people know this story? How does the story go?
I forget most of it, but basically it says, I don't know if I'm the butterfly dreaming of being a person or a person dreaming about being a butterfly.
That's right. And he's okay with that. In fact, he revels in that ambiguity. If it were Socrates or Plato, you need to know the answer to that. You need to know the truth with certainty. And I mean, it has to do with self. Know thyself. This is actually, it's in the Bible, but that was inscribed above the Temple of Delphi.
And that's all I know about him, though. I don't know anything else what he taught. I think Mad Magazine did that back in the day. I think that's how I discovered him.
Uh-huh.
But what else? Did he have a set of teaching, or did he?
So there's a book. It's called the Zhuangzi, and there are 30-some chapters, more than that. Some of which are regarded as apocryphal, but the first 7 are called the inner chapters. Nobody seems to have any question about them. But it really is fun because he plays in the paradoxes of language and reason, and laughs about it all. This is very contrast. There's a lot that's very Zenish about it. By the way, he's in the 4th century BC, about the same time as Socrates. But he just talks about rambling freely. Let me just tell you one story. So he tells a story of 2 people who are getting old, and you start to hunch over and maybe your limbs don't work, and who knows, you might even become kind of a cripple. And first of all, that's not me, that's my body, and it's not good. And everything will be perfected and restored someday. But that's not the way Zhuangzi these old guys see it. You know, they laugh at each other. I'm getting to be a cripple. You know, my arm and my hand, it's getting all contorted. If this goes on anymore, I'm going to have a chicken wing. Ha 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 ha. You know, let it go, let it happen. It has nothing to do with reason. It's not me. It's part of the process. You know, let go of whatever conception of self you had about being an Olympic athlete. You know, why don't you laugh at this? Yeah, also, well, so getting, you know, on the reason side and the unreason side, so language is a big theme in there. And, you know, in language, we might think as being at the core of all this reason stuff. But, you know, even in language, we don't really understand what it is to speak, any of us. We don't really understand even our own words. That's why Socrates was able to get into all those arguments. Nobody knows what they're talking about, but we talk about it, you know. We don't even know how we talk. We don't even know how we learn language. It just happens. None of us could manage speech. You know, we assume that there are all these mechanisms that make it possible to acquire a language, but it has nothing to do with conscious reason. It all happens outside of consciousness and outside of reason. Again, it's a Zhuangzian play.
This is also true. AI, artificial intelligence, is revealing that what we do without thinking about it, I get up and walk across the floor, open the door, go outside. That's immensely difficult to teach a robot to do. And if we had to think, if we had to do that consciously, we couldn't do it. It's way too complicated.
That's right. And so this just the act of walking across the floor. We walking across the floor. That is what we are. We are floor walkers. It, you know, it really is outside of reason.
But we don't really do it.
We
We
don't do it.
We're not really doing it.
Uh-huh. So so Zhuangzi has a lot of conversations about language and how it kind of happens. And this is why nobody is more literate than Zhuangzi. But he doesn't take possession of the words. You know, it plays. And he also likens this to like the chirping of birds. You know, it's something that it's a lot more just instinctual, and it shows itself. Well, you know, where this is, where I'm kind of going, but I'm going to have to really stop. And Sensei's kind of made the point already. But, you know, Buddha was a very reasonable person. You know, the sutras, 84,000 sutras, or how many there really are. But, and, you know, Sensei mentions this in his talks too. There are all these lists, you know, they're the 5 aggregates. They're the 6, the 12, the 18 elements, the 12-fold chain of causation, you know, so many virtues. And this gets carried on in the Buddhist tradition. Abhidharma, you know, they develop a theory of reality in terms of 75 elements, and they can enumerate them all and explain them all. And then Yogacara goes on to build from that with 100 elements. You know, nobody has a better picture. Even Socrates didn't have a nice picture like that. So I think that means it's time to stop.
5 minutes.
But so, you know, the Buddha's all very reasonable, and nobody's a better teacher and methodical than the Buddha. But where is this going? It's not really about reason. And the self that is doing this, the essence of that is not reason. And we are not talking about some disembodied kind of mind. And the whole value of what the Buddha is doing, if it's anywhere, it is right here. I wanted to kind of develop that contrast, but here, let me just throw this in at the end. You know, this isn't just an academic exercise. It's not academic at all. But I'm just not it's not that I'm just talking about ideas. Like I said, on a conscious level, I completely reject, not completely, but in the ways that I've talked about it today, I reject all of that stuff. I didn't talk about Descartes at all, but you all know Descartes. I reject these ideas. I don't believe in souls. I don't believe in disembodiment. I don't have that picture. I believe that raking the leaves has value. I don't think that the most meaningful life is a life where it's a disembodied life where you're in some kind of mystic communion with the form of the good. No, I don't think that at all. However, and this is the funny thing, and this is where my delusion is. Just by a short biographical note. You know, this is not the point. But my life has been completely disrupted. Lost my marriage, lost my money, I lost my job. I had a full-time job teaching philosophy. I've lost a large degree of my mental health. I've lost everything, kind of. But when I think about it, you know, what is making everything so hard for me right now? Like, why can't I move on? What is the problem? It's precisely the ideas that I reject. And so, like, what are those ideas? Well, like if we take the job thing, okay, I was teaching philosophy. I like thinking. I identify with thinking. And in spite of everything I might say, I think, you know, either on subconscious, unconscious levels, I'm not sure that any other life would have value. If I can't have this life, it's like, you know, life is not worth living. What am I supposed to do? Work at Walmart? If somebody would give me a rate to pay me, I would probably do that. But it's these, and it's, I know I don't even believe in reincarnation. That's a separate talk. But, you know, so the finitude of life, and all of these ideas of, so self, ego as a thinker, and the life that has value, I realize that, and all of you, all of us today, you know, we're here. So we all believe in non-self. We all believe in raking the leaves. We all believe that our feet are on the floor. But when I look back and I ask myself, you know, what is causing this stuckedness and this suffering in my life? I have to come back to, and I hate to admit it, and I hope it's not true of you, but I wonder if it, on some level, if all of us are kind of caught up in this, I'm trapped by a certain conception, a very skewed conception of self and value, and even time and death and meaning. Well, I guess, you know, there's not time for 84,000 minutes today, so I really didn't say anything that it's the most plain thing. So we'll just stop there.
So I just wanted to add one comment and then let's take questions. It's just after then, so we have plenty of time. Buddha was practicing in a milieu where there was the same kind of, as I get it at least, the same kind of idea that there is an ideal state, and it's called trance or French recomment, something like that, for this trance-like awareness that we can reach through our meditation. And Buddha, in the Sharingan Sutra, they have the 50 warnings in each of the 5 skandhas, 10 per each. He was just saying, don't get stuck here, don't get stuck there, don't get stuck here. 50 different things that may occur in your meditation where you think you're, oh, now I'm enlightened. He said, you're not done yet, keep going all the way through. And so you can take that model and say, we're in this samsara, right, everyday existence, where we stub our toe and it's, confusing and so forth. But through our meditation, we can go to nirvana. Okamura had this funny thing to say. He said, you go to nirvana, there's nobody there. Because only bodhisattvas can go there and they choose to stay here. So there's no one there. But this idea is like the good, like the ultimate good, or like the disembodied heaven, paradise, mental, so forth, spirit. Descartes' spirit, separate from body. It's called nirvana, ideal, freedom, liberation. The Buddha's point was, yeah, that's way over on this side, and you can die there. You can actually just choose not to live. But, his point was you get stuck in kind of a cosmic purgatory of some sort. It's not a natural death. And one of those warnings is, remember your vows. You can die now, but don't. Remember your vows to help all others, the Bodhisattva model, right? So the way I get it is, in the proto-Hindu context in which he was raised, that was considered the highest level of achievement to get to that state. But Buddha claims that he went all the way through that, so-called nirvana, came all the way back here, samsara, where nirvana and samsara are no longer separate. This would be the Zen or Buddhist model to resolve all of these seeming dualities that are not only in the Greek model, but in the early Hindu model as well.
Next week.
Wonderful talk. Anyway, let's go around the room. This is your fault, so you have to come up with something else.
Well, I think the only thing I would say was one thing that kept kind of recurring to me is one of my favorite quotes of the Buddha, or things that was attributed to him. He was debating one of the great Hindu philosophers of the day. He was invited to this debate, and they were thrown.
Who is this you're talking about?
I can't remember who he was, but it was the Buddha was invited to debate this guy, and they were thrown out all of the typical
Seneca, maybe he was the heretic Seneca,
something like that. But they were thrown all of the typical metaphysical questions, nature of God, what happens after all of these kinds of things. And when it was the Buddha's turn to speak, his response was, if you knew that, how would it help? And so I think that in a lot of ways, like the way we were talking about Plato and how you tied into the Chinese philosophies and then eventually got us to Zen, which I think was really great, by the way. That's kind of the thing. You're still right here, regardless of what you pin your metaphysical ideas on. Regardless of what you believe. I mean, when you said, I do not believe in reincarnation, there's probably a few people here that do, but the bottom line is, you're sitting right here. So if you did know those things, if you did get to that level of pure intellect and were able to figure all that out, how would it really help? You're still here. You still got to face your own death. You still got to go through that period. I can't feel my legs anymore, but here I am. So
the other answer to that I've heard is that I don't know anything about rebirth. And the question to that is, what do you think this is?
Yeah, it's your reset every second, however you want to closely park time, it's a constant reset. But I thought that was an excellent talk, and I really appreciate it.
I didn't get to the talk. But okay.
That was all preamble.
Yeah.
You have to come back.
Now you have to come back.
Let's just go down the road.
I don't have any questions, but thank you so much for being here, and that was really good insight for sure.
Talk something.
See, it seems like you did share with us your great realization of
Delusion.
delusion, or great realization of delusion. And where I come from, there's an expression that can you practice with that? And we practice with from the deluded state, and I think that's sort of what provides the motivation to stay with whatever it is that allows us to continue to contribute day after day, practicing from a great state of uncertainty.
How would you say we should practice from that place? Or in that place?
What are some of the foundational elements of what is regarded as practice in a sort of Zen center? I think that's something that is worthwhile contemplating. Perhaps every time sit down on a cushion, contemplating, what is practice. I think that's the one way to go forward.
First, really appreciate the talk. I really enjoyed it. It was great time for Platonic and Socratic philosophy, real life, right? Like, what are we dealing with right now? And I think I share with you the same problems, at least my own perspective, what I heard you say. It's one thing to say, I get the concept of no self, and I get the idea of impermanence. But for me, speaking for myself, I can say I understand it intellectually. It's not in my bones, right? I don't realize it, using some words that I hear around here. And so I keep falling into these traps of life, right? But yeah, I don't think I am separate from everybody. I really don't. Scientifically, it doesn't seem plausible. It seems like everything is connected. I know I'm not permanent, but I keep acting like I'm separate. Keep acting like I'm here and I'm going to stay here for at least a good long time. Keep deluding myself. I don't want to think about my gut. So I just want to share that reading Guy Armstrong's Emptiness, it's one book that I picked up recently that I think is really interesting. Trying to figure out what emptiness is all about. And it ties in with Zazen that he argues, and I've heard here many times, just sit. Why? What is that going to do for me? Well, I guess if I keep sitting and keep sitting and keep sitting, perhaps there'll be these moments where I'm forced to confront the reality on a non-intellectual way, in a body way, right? And then it will become more part of I'll be unblocked. That's my goal. That's my thought process here. Psychologists have the term need for cognition, and I guess you and I share that. I enjoy thinking too. Really love to kind of be really high on that scale. I think that's probably not a good thing. Might be good for my job. You know, so much good for my love.
I think it's a good, necessary thing. The real problem, is it the only thing? Or how does it fit into every other part of our being?
Well, I just wanted to say I'm with you. Yeah. If there's a there to get to, I'm definitely far away from it, but I keep hearing the message, sit, pay attention, and maybe it'll come. I don't know if it will or not, but it's a real struggle. So anyway, thank you for sharing your personal struggles.
Michael?
First of all, thank you. I was introduced to the story of Socrates when I was 21. I actually forgotten it. And to re-remember it at my late 50s has a very unique perspective. So thank you for sharing that. I was really drawn by his criminal defense, which was, the reason for doing what I do is because because I am not the wisest man, which is literally the most humble of statements, and yet to say I've never found anyone wiser is literally the most arrogant of statements, which to me, the idea of thought meeting with perception, the word that came to mind was collision, because that is the moment of reckoning on some level. My mind even ventured off into the idea of, what would Socrates say on Facebook in this day and age, and how many people would he piss off? But I wanted to thank you for that. Just the idea of recognizing that, much like Socrates, where the imposing of one's point of view can really create a collision and a catastrophe, much like Christ, much like Martin Luther King, much like Mahatma Gandhi, and eventually in such a chaotic time can cause the death of a human being for what they believe in. So, I wonder if, the moving away from such a collision is the practice. When in fact that is the choice of Zen, to move away from the collision and just allow the collision of its own properties in life, and embrace the observation of it all. But to me, that may be the practice. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. The question of collision, so peacefulness, but that's an important issue. It's a little bit different from like these metaphysical ideas that I'm taught, unless those metaphysical ideas inform the way that you collide. Are you?
Well, we're drawn to the train wreck. That's a human condition, and so we cannot look. We cannot see it, and if in fact we are privy to it, we're going to watch it. And I think to some extent, with Zen, at least my own personal perspective, is to acknowledge that I desire for the drama, and yet to be able to be powerful enough to gently move away from it. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. But, yeah, the collision is inevitable. I think certainly with any human being that's on a quest for enlightenment, collision of perception and truth is inevitable. How we react to it, with Zen, he said, which is I'm finding out to be pretty profound, but certainly more profound than the other choices that I have. But I think the collision is inevitable. I do think, especially being a philosopher, you thought yourself into a box, and the idea of taking yourself out of a box Chinese finger puzzle. You know, that's just my thoughts on it, I suppose. That makes sense.
So Chris,
I don't have any questions, but I want to thank you for a great room.
Joseph, let's try that one, come back this way.
Thank you for your teaching. There are no questions on mine.
Any for you?
Just a quick comment, I guess. Yeah, I very much recognize, like, the Socratic tradition is what, I was brought up in, what a lot of us are brought up in. And we're so used to thinking that, like, we're so used to identifying with our intellects. I certainly am. That, even if we consciously reject that kind of philosophical ground, we've kind of trapped ourselves, because at least the way I'm used to thinking is like, okay, I'm my intellect. I get to decide what's true and what's false. And this is false, so go away. And because I've figured out the truth with my big fancy brain, everything should be better. But like, the foundation of that kind of thinking is the very principles that I just consciously rejected. And so it sets off this like paradoxical feedback loop that shakes itself to bits. And as like a scientist, that's very much the approach I'm used to taking with things, true and false with the intellect. And I haven't quite figured out how to get around that. I'm definitely somebody who kind of thinks too much, basically. But thinking about this stuff, I agree with you. It's tremendously practical. This is not an abstract exercise. This has to do with, how we live and our experience right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So I don't mean to be anti-thinking necessarily, but it's just a question of having that kind of perspective of where thought fits in to the whole picture more.
Yeah.
And some, like in my case, and in Socrates' case, and so on, I think we fall into a distorted view, but it's not to reject thinking.
Yeah, I'll have one quick thing. So when Joseph asked about the Zhuangzi, it made me think about my own answer to that question. So I'm going to share my own answer to that question. So he said, how could you summarize the Zhuangzi? And then you did a great job talking about the inner chapters and how it's all about learning to accept things for what they are. And there's a term in the Zhuangzi that comes up again and again, which is zuran, which means to allow something to burn according to its own volition, to not consider the fuel that something is burning according to. And my favorite Zhuangzi story is the penumbra of a shadow, which is the faint edge at the edge of a shadow. And the penumbra is talking to his shadow, and he says, what are we the shadow of? And then the shadow says, why do I have to be the shadow of something? Why do I have to be the shadow of a bird or a tree? Why can't I just be the shadow? And why can't you just be the faint edge at the edge of a shadow? And I love that story.
Yeah. The Chinese term zuran, sometimes it's translated spontaneity. Sometimes it's just self-sowing.
Mm-hmm.
It's awkward, but self-sowing.
Mm-hmm. Self-sowing.
It's S-O, self-sow,
Self-sow.
being self-sow, but in a verbal sense. So, and which you could tie closely to Wu Wei also. A selfless self-sowing.
And Wu Wei is translated as?
Not doing.
Yeah, many, like in the martial, but again, not, not doing, no mind, again, spontaneity, effortless effort, but this idea of something happening effortlessly.
And lastly?
I wasn't going to add anything, but I guess might as well.